Synthetic Future here, and I hope this little intro completely hyped you up to take a look at UVI's new soundbank called Asteroid. Asteroid is a very cool new addition to the UVI catalog, and this is a cinematic rhythm and effects designer is what they call it themselves, and I think it's fairly safe to say that everybody likes big drums. I mean, there's a good reason you find them in every single movie trailer ever. And there's just this sort of tribal instinct in humans. When you hear big drums, your brain is like, ah, hell yeah, we are going to fight something, even though we are absolutely not trained to fight anything. It's just when you hear big drums in all the big trailers, and I would show examples, but we all know how YouTube likes examples these days, so let's not go that way. But yeah, we all know the big trailers, the Mad Max kind of stuff, where you have the big impacts and the big drums, and you're just instantly hyped about a movie that was pretty alright, I guess. The drums definitely made it a lot more enjoyable. So one of these things I was looking at were some drums, because there's about 1 billion sample packs out there for different types of drums. I self use a lot of the Ghost Tech stuff, and I use a lot of the XLN stuff. But once you start to look at these big drums, it gets a little bit trickier, and quite often you end up in Contact territory, and well, just one look at the pricing of Contact, and I'm pretty much convinced that's not a route I'm going to go any day soon. It's just too expensive for my taste, and as someone who doesn't make a dime from music, you have to pick your battles. So I've been looking a lot at different opportunities to grab some really big epic drums, and when UVI teased Asteroid, I was instantly hyped, because this has all the big guns, the timpanis, the daiko drums and the taiko drums, really big heavy hitting stuff. But just to make it even more interesting, they added a lot of common drum sounds, but also some very interesting weird drum sounds, glass shatters, metal hits, all that sort of interesting stuff, which is very nice to sprinkle in to add that cinematic flair to your sounds. I will undoubtedly make a follow-up to this video showing some sound design potential, because you don't have to use this as a drum sequencer. You can definitely use some of these samples to create some interesting space-type explosions or whatever. Really, that's the neat thing of sounds. You can take any source and turn it into anything else. And there's a lot of sound sources in this sound bank UVI made. Now, for the full disclaimer-ness, because that's the way you should do things, I did contact UVI to send me a license. They politely declined and offered me a discount code instead, so I could buy this below the early bird price, but I still had to pay for it, which I gladly did, because I needed these drums, so here we are. So the intro I just showed uses a few instances of Asteroid layered together to create this really big epic sound, and I just want to go over some of the basics here, and in a later video we will do some deep diving. So this is the main interface of Asteroid. It's a 7-lane sequencer, so you have 7 different instruments which you can load in. Simply clicking the little arrow thingy here will give you the drop downs. Let's not change that sound, let's take this one. There is quite an extensive list of different sounds, all neatly categorized, so it's fairly easy to find the type of sound you're looking for. Now, one thing that I think is a little bit of a shame is it doesn't preview sounds here, so if you click a sound it doesn't do a little preview. That would have been neat. And another thing that I did notice is if you right click you have this add to favorites, which sounds very promising until you hit it and absolutely nothing happens, and there's also no favorites list here. So that's a little bit puzzling. I guess you just have to keep a notepad, or you can just save presets, of course, as per usual. But it's a little detail that I did notice, which is a little bit weird. Anyways, 7 lanes, a volume per lane, you have a mute, or a bypass as they call it, it's mute, and a solo button, and if you click the thingy, it will give that sound, unless you mute it, in which case it doesn't. Up here we have some main controls. This is the main volume control and the overall velocity control, and this is very nice in conjunction with the dynamics. So let's get a little thingy going. Now if we start turning the dynamics down, you will lose all the softer hits and they will become louder. So that's one way to build the energy of your sequence. And you also have this velocity, which ties in. So if I dial down the dynamics, it will still be loud, of course. But if I push up the dynamics, you can now play it pretty softly. And if you start to push it, and as you can hear, there's a pretty good range, and it's a very smooth gradient between soft and loud. So it's a very well sampled library you have here. And next to that we get the thrust, which is a compressor exciter combo to really push the sound over the top. Now do keep in mind that this does tend to cut out already playing sounds, so you have to be a little bit careful with how you use it. In the intro track I kind of circumvented it by using two instances playing the same beat, but one with a higher thrust and moving it up while the other one wasn't playing. Anyways, let's add some velocity. So that's pretty epic for build-ups, but you could hear it cuts out, and if you mess around with it too much, you will annoy the UVI gods and everything will crash. So yeah, don't wiggle that slider too much because things will go haywire. So let's move on with some more controls. Down here you have a randomizer button to randomize all the different tracks. And you can also undo this. That's pretty neat, and that's your basic stuff. Up here you have some kits, pre-made kits, and pre-made sequences, which are all categorized and BPM tagged. Workstation and Vulkan will take over your BPM, so if you load in something slower, it will still play at your DAW BPM. It doesn't seem to completely transport sync. So if you're running a sequence, for instance, and I'm going to start and stop the playback, you'll see what I mean. So that's mildly annoying. Would have been a nice feature to have this auto sync with the DAW for playback. Makes it a little bit easier to write stuff without having to deal with MIDI. Alright, so that's your main display and your sequences. In the edit screen you get a whole lot of extra control. You have a reverb and delay send for every individual track. You also get some width controls, and you get panning, which goes left to right and near and far. And if you want to quickly reset this, you can just alt-click it and it will be centered. Now there isn't a dialog option to enter a value, so that's a little bit of a shame. Well, I guess most cases you don't have to be that exact anyway, so that's not the biggest issue in the world. Underneath you will find for every instrument some extra controls. You will get a shaper, which can do transient shaping and set the tail length. And you can also reverse the sample. And one of the fun things you can do is you can actually automate this parameter. By right-clicking it, you can set it to either a MIDI CC, or you can also set it to host automation, and you can automate this parameter in your DAW, so that's pretty interesting. You get pitch controls, which go pretty high and pretty low. These you can actually type in by double clicking, and if you hold Control, you can fine tune it in really small increments. You also get a unison control, basic equalizer, and some effects: a drive, bit crusher, frequency shifter, phaser, and a flanger, and this is for every instrument individually. Next to that is another pretty interesting option, and that's the repeat. And in the repeat you can actually set how the notes respond when you hold a note down. So in this example I will do a 6th loop of 16th notes. I will just draw in a little pattern. Let's do something with some dynamics. And now if I hold down a note, it's a pretty nice way to quickly draw out some basic sequencing. You can do this for every single instrument, which is pretty cool, and it gives you a lot of opportunities to customize your sounds. Up here you also have this little trust setting again. The volume, sadly not the dynamic setting, which would have been nice to have here, although you can bind it to your mod wheel. So I guess that's somewhat forgiven, although a graphical representation would have been handy. You also get a reverb and a delay, and this is global, and you can send your different instruments into the reverb and delay. Of course, these are the UVI effects, so they use pretty neat IRs for this, with a pretty good selection of different reverbs. If you want to have different reverbs overall, you can also use the effects, which are built into Workstation, or you can of course just throw in your own reverbs on the track. This plugin or this soundbank also supports multi-out, so you can also route every sound to an individual output and process it externally if you feel like doing it that way. Equalizer, compressor, and limiter. Especially compressor and limiter, very handy, because these sounds can get pretty loud, which is of course kind of the point. Epic sounds and all. Sequencer, very neat, 128 steps, velocity, panning, pitch, decay, reverb, and delay can be set using the sequencer. Very easy to draw in some random shapes. You also get the soloing here. So just for the general ID. If you want to quickly erase sequences, you can just draw a bar, drag it down and just move left and right, and it will delete everything in that row. It will not affect the other rows, so that's pretty neat. You can go absolutely ham with this, because you have quite a few steps. Feature, you can also link it, because you have 4 bars. You can copy it every other bar, every quarter bar, every 8th bar. So this is especially very nice if you just want to quickly draw in something. Like for instance, I want to play a note every... Of course I'm going to completely fill now. Every 8, you can just do this. And I'll copy that every 8. Now let's do every quarter. We want to make it a little softer. It's very nice. And let's add in a little ghost note. Let's do that again every 8th. Let's do that here. And that makes editing very, very easy to do. You can change the grid size from a quarter note to a 64 triplet, which is a very, very short note, which goes all the way into invisible range. If you hold your mouse here, you can also scroll to change the value of whatever you are on. So that's pretty neat. Once you have a sequence which is halfway decent, so let me just quickly reset it. You can simply press generate and drag the MIDI out into your project, and that's how you get your MIDI out, which is a very neat feature. If you want to have a little bit more control, you can also maximize the screen, so you have a little bit more fine control. And you also have some presets here for different sequences, and you can copy between tracks, which is very neat for a sequencer. Makes working pretty fast. And once you're done, you can always save your sequences you want to keep, simply by hitting the save here. Now, one small gripe is that it doesn't have a folder system for your saves. So if you make your own instruments, for instance, there is not a user category, which I think is a little bit of a shame. It will simply throw a file somewhere on your hard drive, which feels a little bit outdated. That's one of the main gripes I have with Asteroid, is there's a lot of good stuff, and then there's like these small little things where I go, why is everything so good and why is this a little bit weird? Like the lack of a playback button for the sound here or in the manager is a little bit odd. It's not a deal breaker, of course, but it's a little bit odd. Yeah, talking about sounds for a second, like I said, there's a huge list of sounds in this. If you go to the website and you grab the manual, you can actually see all the sounds they have in there. It's the taikos, like I said, the timpale, daikos, but also some very interesting, more tribal drummy things. As in, there's also djembes in here, congos, bongos, cajons, let's make it extra French, derbukas, all sorts of interesting, I don't think you can use the word world instrument anymore, but less common, more tribal instrument styles, maybe, perhaps. Yeah, and that adds a lot, because you don't just get the big drums, you also get a lot of interesting filler drums, which can be very useful. And if you've heard my most recent track, you will have heard me using drums, not specifically Asteroid, by the way. That was a contact library for the djembes and stuff, but that sort of stuff is very, very much fun to play around with, and having all that extra stuff in here is a very sweet bonus to have. It just adds to your possibilities. So that's Asteroid in a nutshell, and I think Asteroid is absolutely brilliant. Now, it's not the cheapest sound bank out there, and I'm well aware of this. I bought it with a discount, which does make it a lot more interesting. We are still talking about almost 150 euros right now, which is considerable. I would say it's fairly comparable with a lot of Contact libraries in that sense. Big difference being that you can just run this into free workstation, so you don't have to actually get full Contact to be able to use it, which is very nice. It's very high quality as well, and you get all the effects built into workstation to your disposal as well, so it's going to be cheaper in that regard as well. And there's a lot of stuff in here. If you're unfamiliar with workstation, I would say that's already one of the reasons why UVI is very interesting for sound banks, because it just gives you a lot of extra stuff to play around with without any extra cost, where Contact you have to buy all the effects or get the rather expensive instruments. So if you're in the business for very big drums, this is definitely one of those things that is going to make you very, very happy, because it just ticks all the boxes and it does so much cool stuff. If you are looking for an extension to your drum sound, to add some diversity and some new interest, I would also highly recommend this, because it's not just the big trailer sounds, it's also interesting other instruments which can just add that little bit of spice. So that's my first impressions of Asteroid by UVI, the sound bank. I will link it in the description. There will be some videos following this one, hopefully soon TM. A little bit busy lately, as you might have noticed. Content is a little bit slow, but I'll try to squeeze in some tips and ideas when I get the time. So that's it for now. I hope you found this video interesting. I hope it helped you with making a decision if this is a product you would like to buy. And for now, I'm going to say have a great day.